Our guest on the CTQ SmartCast today is Roshan Cariappa. Roshan is a founder, a marketer, and a podcaster, and he's passionate about all things India and all things startups. So there is no surprise that two of his active podcasts right now are based on these themes. One is called Bharatvaarta and one is called The Startup Operator, and both of them have just crossed the 1 year mark. So in this smartcast, we'll get Roshan's views on how he started podcasting, how to build a new skill from scratch. What's his curiosity diet like? We'll touch a little bit about marketing as well. So Roshan, welcome to the smartcast.
Hey, thank you so much, Ramanand. Thank you, Harish, as well, for hosting me. I guess it's a nice change for me to be on the other end of the questions. I am pretty excited and also a little bit anxious. I don't know what wisdom I have to offer, but I've had a whole bunch of experiences and mistakes, and hopefully that will be useful and perhaps even entertaining for your listeners.
Yeah, and for people watching this for the first time, Roshan has had us on his show, and it's our pleasure to have do the honors ourselves. So Roshan, you've been podcasting for a while, but I actually want to turn the clock a little bit and ask you: have you always been the kind of a person who enjoys the spotlight, is on stage, or was that something that you taught yourself to do?
So I discovered this term called ambivert, right? Which is like sometimes introvert and sometimes extrovert. And I guess that probably classifies me, right? So with the people I know and understand very well, I'm extremely extroverted. I'm the center of the attention and life of the party, so to speak. But otherwise, I'm a fairly introverted person. I've also been a lot on the creative side of things. So I've always, been someone who wrote things, who sang, who played the guitar, so on and so forth. So I guess, in some sense, the spotlight was thrust on me from an early age itself, right? So, you can imagine quite often, like your uncles or aunts come over and, your dad or mom pushes you and asks you to recite a poem or like sing or whatever, except that in my case, I mean, that has continued for 34 years of my life, right? I mean, typically that's what has happened. Never been comfortable with the performing aspect of things, right? Because um, I I don't know a bit about I don't know if I want to call it artistry, but I mean I'm always comfortable with the creation aspect of things, right? Creating something new out of nothing. Not really comfortable with showing it off and with taking a stage and so on and so forth. I've always struggled with that because I always feel like my creativity is like deeply personal and I don't really want any validation from someone else in that sense. But yeah, I mean, earliest memories of this are sort of nightmarish. I mean, we used to go to this Kodava Samaj functions, right? So, and man, I had to sing in front of a whole bunch of uncles and aunties right after lunch, right after they probably polished off half a bottle of whiskey or gin or whatever it is. And I had to sing like, the latest Hindi songs that were there. I remember singing Jackie Shroff's, Amma Dekh, you know, a cappella at that, right? So, I mean, so those were like some really, really crazy memories. I mean, it's revolting when I think about it even now, right? So, of course, I mean, perhaps, I mean, much of your listeners, I did perform in inter-school competitions, inter-college competitions, and so on and so forth. Was part of a fairly successful Mad Ads team. That was interesting. And podcasting was sort of an organic extension of whatever I was doing, right? So used to have a fair number of debates with my friends about politics, policy, all of the current affairs. And I thought, we needed a better medium to sort of hash these things out because these are complex issues. And, you don't want to talk about these things on WhatsApp where it kind of devolves into hopeless one-upmanship, right? So that was Bharatvaarta. And with the startup operator, I transitioned to being an employee about 4 years back, and I was always morbidly afraid of turning into Stanley from The Office, right? And really clock out at 5 p.m. no matter what, right? And so, I mean, I used to keep in touch with a lot of my founder friends and operators and so on. And COVID happened, and I couldn't really meet these people in person. So again, the startup operator is an extension of that. I would have these conversations offline in the good old days. But then, I mean, COVID happened and I had to shift this online. And I thought, hey, a whole bunch of people can sort of benefit from this. So that's really how podcasting started for me, actually, very organically.
Interesting. There are a couple of things I want to kind of get into. Uh, you mentioned the fact about being an ambivert, or the fact that there are different possible creative outlets. You just being on the stage doesn't always have to be being the actor or being the lead guitarist. It
Yeah.
can mean several other things. And someone I know once told me about how he got into blogging. He said that it was a perfect kind of outlet for someone like him. He may have
Mhm.
described himself in similar terms like you, just that that was the right medium for him for whatever reason. And I think that the good thing is that we have lots of different channels to explore right now and find
Yeah.
the one that fits our personality and where we are at that
Yeah.
given point in time. So clearly you kind of had some exposure. You could, you didn't mind occasionally making a fool of yourself. You're kind of done that. So there's no more inhibitions holding you back. So
Mm.
I actually wanted to ask, are you the reflective types? Do you kind of look at your episodes and say, uh, you know, this is what I could have done better, and kind of look at it as a very sort of a something that you have to get better at, or you just trust yourself and say, let me just do it and let me come back to it after 3 months, 6 months. So what kind of person are you from a reflection
So
point of view?
so I am a reflective person, right? But I want to like touch upon something that you mentioned, which is that I've been comfortable with it, but
Mm,
I actually haven't been comfortable with this, right?
mm,
So I've had horrible stage fright, right? I've
mm,
had, like, I mean, think of all the nightmarish situations you can have, like socially awkward, like total nightmares, right? Those have happened to me, right? Forgetting lyrics, forgetting how to play, and like forgetting what words to say, and so on and so forth. Those have happened to me, and I can, they're still there at the back of my head, right? So
correct.
I think the important thing that I did was going further and trying to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right?
Mm,
Because quite often our fears are larger than they are,
mm,
right? In our heads. Okay. Once you know your fears and even sort of befriend them, it becomes at least understandable that ambiguity is not there, right? And um, a lot of it is, so I'll split it into two parts, right? So one is like the technical stuff in terms of understanding, how your voice carries on a mic, for example, right? Or what are the first few sentences that you have to say when you get on a stage, right? Those kind of things, I mean, and those kind of things you can just learn through rote sort of practice, right? You do it often enough, you'll learn it, right? And but if you don't get on a stage and you don't do it often enough, you don't get to learn it, right? And it sort of becomes that whole vicious cycle of like you being afraid of something and never getting to do it, right? And because of that, again, you're afraid to get on stage or do that thing that you're afraid of, right? So that is one thing, but also to kind of look at the deeper level of it, right? So what is it that is scaring you? And for me, it was this thing about validation, right? About the fact that, hey, perhaps I'm not good enough, right? And if you think about it enough, right, I mean, you can always kind of do that sort of root cause analysis, and you will find its way to something perhaps somebody said, or something you experienced when maybe you were 4 or 5 or 10 perhaps, right? And that's a solvable problem. That's not an unsolvable problem, or that's not an invisible problem. And I'm not saying these things will make you get comfortable instantly, or you'll perhaps like attain this sort of a magic state where you get comfortable overnight, but it's a process, right? And for people who are listening, I would say, like, whatever you're afraid of, try to understand these fears and get comfortable with it. Maybe, I mean, you will make progress on that front, at the very least. So yeah. And so again, I mean, given the mediums that we have, you mentioned the different sort of mediums, right? See, if you're not the kind of person who wants to go up on stage like physically and present, virtual is a fantastic medium, right? So I'm not with Ramanand right now, I'm with Ramanand projected as pixels in front of me, you know and that's a difference, right? There's a definite difference, right? And I guess you could call it hacks or whatever, but you'll have to sort of do these things to get comfortable with yourself, right? With those fears and so on. So with the reflective part of things, right? I mean, I know people who put out content and then reflect ad nauseum about the stuff, right? What did I say? What did I do? And everything. I am not one of those. I just don't like listening to my own voice. Uh, uh, I don't know. I mean, I have this very awkward sort of a feeling. I'm trying to get used to it. But in general, I do reflect a lot about experiences, right? Things I could have said, things I could have done, and those are the things that tell me, like, basically, that what I could do better, essentially, right? And I guess that's part of everyone's psyche in some sense, right? So with the two podcasts, Bharatvaarta and Startup Operator, they're kind of different in themselves, right? In the quality that evokes within me. So with Bharatvaarta, it's very, very complex, right? I mean, things like, for example, economics. Now, you do an episode on economics with Harsh Gupta, there will be 400 things coming from that episode that you want to understand more about. Like, what the hell was this, right? And to me, when I listen to it, when I re-listen to it like 2 3 4 times, I mean, it sort of fits in my head, and also, I mean, it sets me off on a rabbit hole in terms of what more I want to understand, right? And with Startup Operator, it's slightly different. I mean, I've done product, I've done marketing, I've done sales. I've been fairly cross-functional over the last 13 years, right? And I have certain principles and I've had certain experiences, right? And when I listen to the Startup Operator episodes, it's more about validating some of the things that I had assumed. For instance, right? Marketing works this way, right? So you might want to revisit some of those things, and that's a good opportunity for me to do that. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It did. I actually almost thought of it as learning in real time. That's what you seem to be doing in these episodes.
Yeah,
And I think you mentioned Harsh. I recently listened to one of your episodes with him, and yes, there is like a broad set of things that are coming at even the listener.
yeah,
But I have the luxury of maybe pausing it maybe a little
yeah,
bit and going and looking at something. But you are you've got to deal with this real time, and you're learning in real time, which is very
yeah.
interesting. It actually almost listening to you so far, it almost felt like this is another form of entrepreneurship. It's the same attitudes in some sense, or
Mm,
it's an entrepreneurial attitude in the sense that you kind of know you don't know a lot. That doesn't hold you back. You
mm,
take the little risks that come along. You do very quick adjustments, sometimes in real time, sometimes later.
mm,
And slowly things kind of get better and better. And there is also a part of you that is still going to do it, going to show up tomorrow, even though there's so much to improve. So uh, is this a fair way to look at it, that
yeah.
ultimately there is an Roshan the entrepreneur is also coming in through in Roshan the podcaster?
Yeah. No, that's a very nice way of describing it, right? I've always said that it's a founder mindset. You know, you don't necessarily have to. I mean, obviously, there are certain things you pick up when you run a company, and when you really have to put food on the table based on whatever you do, right? There's certain it imputes some maximum sort of skin in the game that there's no hiding from, right? And I would highly recommend everyone go through that journey at some point in their lives, because it's life changing, right? There's nothing that comes as close, right? Or I mean, I'm exaggerating, but perhaps I'm in the top 5% of human experiences, I would say, right? Um, but that's true. I mean, it's about having a founder's mindset, right? It's about knowing that you may not know everything, right? But you'll put the first foot forward, right? You may have to take like a step back or whatever it is, but you'll put the first foot forward and then maybe move an inch and an inch after that, whatever. And that's perfectly fine. That's absolutely fine, right? And see, with regards to things that I know and don't know, I think I'm fairly certain about it. Like I know there are some things I don't know, and I'm very, very open about it, right? So I have no qualms in admitting that I don't know as much economics as Harsh, right? Obviously, I mean, the guy has spent the last like 15 20 years like of his life learning that. And my point also is that I don't have to know that much, right? My average listener is not an economist. My average listener is an average person like you or me, who's trying to really learn the nuances of what's really happening around the world. And that actually, I mean, I call it the sort of Joe Rogan mindset, right? So the kind of guy, the kind of people that he interviews, whether it's like quantum physicists or UFC fighters or some kind of crazy startup CEOs and so on and so forth. I mean, he doesn't know everything about everything, but he knows some small things about, like, the world in general. And that is his frame of reference for any conversation, right? And he's happy to come across as a novice, or as a or even as a very naive person. Perfectly fine, right? He'll ask questions like, how does that work? How does that money work? Right? What is Bitcoin? I mean, he's not trying to like learn those three or four wiki answers and trying to superimpose that in conversation, right? Because the thing you realize is that there's quite nothing like an expert trying to explain something to you. In fact, I think you judge the level of expertness by how well they're able to explain this to the novice people, right? So yeah, I mean, it is a sort of a founder's mindset, and there's a lot of hustle involved. I mean, podcasts are not all about uh, what kind of technology you use on the production side, and all of those things. I mean, there's a lot of hustle. So I'll give you an instance, right? So I do roughly about 4 podcasts every week, right? How does it happen? I mean, even if you just do the rough math, right? I mean, that's like 4 or 5 people that I have to schedule with on a weekly basis, right? Which means that I might have to perhaps reach out to about twice the number of people, and so on and so forth, right? And I've been able to do this like on a weekly basis. So every week for a year, right? So we've put out perhaps, I mean, about 250 to 300 podcasts now. And so yeah, you need to have that hustler mindset, and also you have to marry that hustle with some sort of a vision. I guess, I mean, that is really what separates the really really good founders from just people who are hustlers, right? Which is that they're able to marry this hustle to some sort of a vision, right? And that's a mistake I made when I was an entrepreneur. I did not have a vision, right? I did not have a path that I wanted to I mean, I knew approximately which way I wanted to go, but I didn't define it. I didn't define it for myself. I didn't define it for my team. So I was a very bad entrepreneur in that sense, right? And that's something that I'm learning now, right? Which is that, okay, startup operator has done 100 plus episodes, whatever, has, Bharatvaarta has done 120, 130 episodes, and we have all of these various positive attributes and so on. We're roughly moving in this direction, but where do we want to be a year from now? Where do we want to be like 3 years from now or 5 years from now? I mean, you may not get there, but having that signpost there sort of acts as your moral compass, and that I feel is very, very important.
Fascinating, because I think once you've learned that mindset, and I would include Harish, me, the rest of Choose to Think as similarly minded, in the sense that we've learned to do this by doing. It's not
Yeah.
something that we've had academic training. Not a lot of people in the family, typical
Yeah.
kind of first generation entrepreneur that a lot of us seem to be from.
Yeah.
So I think maybe for people who want to be a little entrepreneurial, maybe they can start up something like a podcast and just kind of take it forward and grapple with all these things.
See, actually, you just think about it as like taking your hobby or a passion project into its logical extension, right? Now, I like talking to people. I like learning from people. What can I do that can extend it further, right? What is that logical extension to it? Maybe podcasting, right? If you like technology, I mean, if you like certain other things, right? I mean, take it to its logical extension, and you will find that when in the process of doing so, I mean, you will build these attributes. You have to.
So, since you briefly talked about managing so many guests and getting it out, now you have a cadence that your audience is kind of being trained by you to
Yeah.
expect. So, tell me a little bit about the what have you put in place now in terms of systems. And I'm again, we're not talking about the tools and it's just a general framework, right? What do you look at it so that you're going to hit these little numbers every week, because that's a treadmill
Yeah.
of its own that you've kind of set in motion. So talk to me about that.
See, I hate to sound like some MBA sort of schmuck, okay? But I mean, I don't have an MBA, that's the truth. But
Hey, neither
it's
do I,
this
so you're safe.
good, in good company, I would say, right? So it's this whole build, master, and scale kind of approach, right? Which is that, day zero, you don't know anything about anything, right? And you're in this discovery mode where you dip your toes, you figure out, what the water is like, and you understand certain things, certain attributes that you want, right? So for us, I mean, we discovered that look, this is the format that typically works for us, and it happened through iterations, right? I mean, I've talked about it earlier. Our first episode on Bharatvaarta was 28 minutes long, right? And we were happy that we kind of limited it to 30 minutes. 30 became 40, 40 became 45, whatever. And today it's very difficult for us to end a podcast ahead of an hour, right? It's always an hour or so, right? And people like it, right? Our engagement has gone up proportionately to that, right? Because again, the thing that we try to understand is like, why do people like this? And they like this because I mean, they're not the kind of people who want to read the headlines or like get the sound bites. They're people who want to really understand the complex nuances of what's really happening around us, right? And similarly with Startup Operator, I mean, there are like 5-minute clips abound, right? I mean, on 3 ways to do this, 5 ways to do that, 10 ways to do something else. I mean, my audience is not that. My audience really wants to understand, how did that founder do this go to market in Southeast Asia, for example, right? How did he hire the first, how did he or she hire the first salesperson, right? And what are the campaigns they ran? How did that go, right? And that's not a 5-minute conversation you can have, right? That's a 45-minute conversation that you want to have. So I feel like you need to do that 0 to 1 and very quickly understand what are the positive attributes that you want to retain and build a process to that. That is the whole master aspect of it, right? So once we understood that, hey, you know what, these are the kind of guests that they want to listen to, right? And this is the typical format. Okay, now I want to put out, let's say, 2 episodes a week, right? What does it mean? And just work backwards from that and build a process to it, right? Which is that, okay, if I have to put out two episodes, then okay, you know what, I need to probably have a lead time of about 2 weeks, just in case, right? Especially given the times that we're in right now, where things are all topsy turvy, right? And it'll be really helpful to have a 2 week lead time, and we have a 2 week lead time right now, right? So we're on May 22nd right now. I'm comfortable until maybe June first week. I have episodes covered, even if I don't do a single episode now, right? And that is the sort of like cover you need to have, right? Because once you hold yourself to that, it becomes a sort of a self-fulfilling sort of a virtuous cycle, right? I mean, you want to be in that place, right? So once you build a process for that, then the other aspect is like, what are the other small things that you can stack on it, right? So I'll give you an example. So we started doing this thing called the weekly sometime back, right? Which is a short 30-minute roundup, or 30-minute, like, whatever happened in this week, 4 or 5 news items that you should know, right? Because if you just, read the news or watch the TV every day, right, there are thousand things that jump out of the screen to you, and all of them, like, how much of it is important, right? I would say 99% of it is not important to you, right? So our hypothesis was that, here are 4 or 5 things, like we cover infrastructure development, for example, right? Um, there's a dam that's getting built. There's a power plant that's getting built. I mean, these are typically things that don't occupy first page or second page news, right? But it's bloody important. It's important for you to understand that last year, even despite the pandemic, our per day capacity in terms of the amount of roads that we built was the highest ever, right? And those are the kind of things, that positive things that we try to highlight, right? Vitalik Buterin, for example, donated $1 billion. What does it mean, right? And how will that money flow through? I mean, what is the significance of it? All of that, right? I mean, so this is what we try to do in our 30-minute weeklies. And I started a similar thing with Startup Operator as well, called the Roundup, right? The weekly and the Roundup. And those are things we added. And, I mean, we saw some positive effects from that. And right now, both of them have done, like, I think weekly has done probably 40 weeks or something of that sort. And Roundup, we've done about 25 roundups, right? And now that is part of the cadence again, right? And then on the roundup, I mean, I've started this thing called bites, which is like 4 or 5 minute snippets of something, right? Like the last bite that I put out was a process is a meme, right? And it was a monologue on why a process should actually be a meme, if it has to be adopted, if it has to make sense, basically, right? And if it has to be effective, essentially. And these are things that you just add and add and add, and you stack, and it becomes part of your cadence then, right? So that's what I tell my team as well, right? And of course, first and foremost, if you need to amplify your efforts, you need to have a team, right? At least that's relevant for me, right? I've always tried to become the kind of person who attracts the right people to collaborate with, and that is super important. I don't want to be doing all of the, I don't want to learn up all of the 360-degree attributes of a particular skill or a project, right? I want to double down on what I like to do, right? I like talking, right? I like learning about people, and I want to double down on that. I want to have, instead of one conversation a week, I want to have 5 or 6, right? But that won't be possible if I don't have others who are kind of offsetting my or complementing my skills, right? So I do have a great team for both the podcasts, right? Who complement on the production side of things, distribution side of things, research side of things, and so on and so forth. And that is again super important, right? Because people often kind of limit themselves by not working with others, right? You have to have that mindset of, like, 1 plus 1 is not 2, 1 plus 1 is equal to 4 or 5 or 10 perhaps, right? There's no way in hell I would have been able to put out 4 episodes a week if I didn't have a couple of people helping me out, right? So yeah, I mean, I guess marry all of this into some sort of a framework that you can work with, and there you have it.
Right. So I think it's a fairly simple set of ideas, but you have to just execute it really well. I think it's the basics of any kind of successful activity. If you want to kind of move it from being a one-off spark to something that keeps showing up every day.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and you have to think about it systematically, right? See, the thing is that I think a lot of hobbies just go to waste because people don't put systems to it. People don't put milestones to it. People don't take it seriously.
Right.
Like, I know musicians who should be musicians, but they aren't, right? Because they just never give a damn about it, right? They never put in a process, never put in a framework, right?
Right.
And
it's also fashionable to kind of say that I'm a creative person, and this sounds like something that I shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? So here's the secret about the most creative personalities in the world, right? I'm not talking about like the top 1% of the 1% of the 1%, the kind of people who wake up and symphonies flow in their head, and not those kind of people, right? But a working musician, I guarantee you, is not the cliche of the stoned, wakes up at 12:30 in the afternoon and has another drink kind of person. That's not the person. A working musician, believe me, is the hardest working person in you can find. Hardest working person. And unlike you or me, he does not have a salary. Right? He's only as good as what he's done just last evening. That's it. That's it. And you know what? Age no bar. There could be like a Korean 12-year-old or 13-year-old who could blow him away tomorrow. Right? So I mean, it's really about having that discipline, right? And that discipline is like super essential for the stuff that you really care about. I mean, people are disciplined about their work, right? About, okay, you know what, logging in at a particular hour, replying to emails at within 2 hours or whatever it is. They're super disciplined about that, but they're not disciplined about the things they really care about their hobbies and passions. And that is super unfortunate,
Yeah, I think a very good example of what you just said is someone like Jerry Seinfeld, right, who's spoken about the systems behind his creative so that enable him to be creative. And I'm happy that he doesn't position it like, jokes just come to me when I wake up sort of a thing, which is really good. Go on.
Sorry, just to belabor that point, right? I mean, see, the Jerry Seinfeld podcast with Tim Ferriss is a damn. I mean, it's. I think I'll probably be 60 and still be listening to it.
Yeah, one about training your dogs.
It's about
training your mind
amazing.
like a dog. Yeah,
exactly, right. So he says, your brain is a dog, your mind is infinite, right? And a lot of it, if you look at it, is programming your brain. That's it. That's all there is, right? And so Jerry Seinfeld, after 30 years or 35 years of writing every day, it's no surprise that he wakes up tomorrow and there are 3 jokes in his head. It's absolutely no surprise at all, right? And who knows, maybe, maybe the likes of Mozart or someone was like that, they couldn't do anything else, right? And we see genius, but it's actually perseverance. I mean, of course, there are those leaps of genius that no one can explain, right? But again, I mean, for the 99.9999% of people around, there's hope. There's hope that you can program yourself to be near genius at least.
Yeah, it reminded me of a joke. I think it's usually attributed to Pandit Ravi Shankar, that asked why he practices every day. He says, "If I don't practice today, I'll know, and if I don't practice tomorrow, my audience will get to know." So Roshan, I want to move about something we were talking before we started recording, which is
Yeah.
that when people come to you and want to talk about podcasting, they'll probably talk about the apps, the equipment. Though, like you said, you want to, your main forte here is to speak to people, learn along with them. So there is a lot of preparation that has to go in to make that conversation. In fact, if you say your conversation is becoming longer, that means it's also going deeper. So with so many episodes, so many different guests, two different podcasts, tell me a little bit about the information prep, the content prep, and whether you get overwhelmed. What do you do with it? You have a team again. Different people have, some of your other presenters have their own strengths. So how do you now look at the preparation part for these podcast episodes?
Okay. Uh, See, this is an amazing question that I could perhaps spend the entire podcast talking about, right? Because it's something that I am learning as well. I'm constantly learning how to be better on this front. And again, the approach is slightly different for both the podcasts that I do, right? Bharatvaarta and Startup Operator. Now, with uh, let me talk about certain common things for both of them, right? The common things for both of them is that the guest defines the content. Okay. So a lot more in the case of like Startup Operator, where it's based on the person's journeys, experiences, whatever it is. But even for something which is technical like Bharatvaarta, right? I mean, where you have someone talking about, let's say, some telecom policy or some infrastructure development or whatever, even then the guest defines the content, right? And so it's very, very important to kind of understand who you want to have on your podcast, right? And what kind of people. And over a period of time, for both the podcasts, we have a certain sense of who would make for a good guest, right? And we have certain markers to figure, like, if this is possible or not. And I think to a reasonable extent we're able to get that right. 99% of the time we're right about those things. So that is a common thing, right? Second, you need to understand context, right? So that is super important, because at least you're starting at the same place then, right? So again, with both these things, it's slightly different, right? So if I have a SaaS founder on the Startup Operator, I need to understand some basis in, I mean, because I work in SaaS, I mean, I do have a certain sense of relatability to that. I have some context, right? I can. On Bharatvaarta, again, I mean, if we are going to interview, for example, scientists, right, who have discovered some way to detect cancer, which is an episode that we're going to put out shortly, right? Obviously we'll have to understand some basic, whatever there is about stem cell research, or uh, those kind of things, right? It absolutely is a basis point for our conversation. And again, understanding context is super important. And then, I always liken a podcaster um, to be like a director, not an actor, right? And that's a subtle but very important difference. Recently, I mean, a good friend of mine asked me, you seem to have interesting views, why don't you talk more on your podcast, right? And my answer was, I mean, I may have certain interesting views, but this podcast is not about me, right? It's very clear from all of the promos and all of the graphics and all of the stuff that the person who's coming to listen to that podcast is going to listen to that particular person, right? Not me, right? So my job is to literally curate content, is to basically direct, and is to choreograph this content in a way that is palatable, the way that is interesting, useful to the listener. And that is what I need to spend time on, right? So once I've chosen my guest, once I have a certain amount of context, my next challenge is to really choreograph this conversation, right? I'm not saying in a way that, okay, you know what, 5 minutes the person will talk this, 15 minutes the person will talk about something else, and so on and so forth. No, right? What happens is, I do have an outline in terms of what themes and what questions I want to ask them, right? And in my head, I know that, it will probably progress from A to B to C, right? But oftentimes, right, what really happens is 50% or more of the podcast is improvised, right? Because you're also responding to something that someone said to you just now. So it's not a Google form, one question after another. It's not that. You also have to be sort of responding to the person in terms of what they're saying and so on and so forth, right? So that is really how I look at the conversation as such, right? And now when you have the guest on your podcast, right, again, very very important to establish a certain vibe,
Right.
right? You need to have that certain sense of vibe in terms of relating to that person, even for very briefly, for about 4 or 5 minutes, right? And I mean, COVID happened and it's kind of solved the small talk problem for us, right? Literally everyone, no matter who you're calling and talking to, someone in California or someone in Pune, you have something to talk about. Hey, how are things at your end, right? So it's important to have that vibe and establish that vibe. And the other important thing that I realized, right, is that great conversation is not great content, right? You have to be super mindful of your audience. I'm not saying that you have to like be a slave to the audience, right? You should have a great conversation. I think it's a necessary but not a sufficient condition, right? You always have to be mindful of the fact that someone else listening to this may want to learn or be entertained about something. So what are you offering to them? And a lot of the times I really have to hold back when I ask these questions to people, because I know that I mean, this is something that I would like to know, but perhaps maybe may not be of interest to uh, the audience, right? And the sort of flip side of it is, in my informal conversations, I slip in the podcast question once a while now, right? So my wife catches me doing this quite often, actually, right? So what do you think about this, or something of that sort, right? But it's fine. I mean, it's perfectly fine, right? So those are few things that I would say are good prep for podcasts in general.
Yeah, so that part of your life is leaking into everything else is
Yeah,
what
yeah.
I'll be taking away. Okay, I think some interesting analogies, right? The founder's mindset, being a director, seeing yourself as an orchestrator, but also participating in the dance that's going along, because you're leading it in certain direction that your audience
Yeah.
wants to see. So I actually wanted to also ask that uh, in terms of your information consumption, therefore,
Hmm.
has it now all is it all revolving around the next episode? Do you find yourself having to read, watch, listen? Everything is kind of the magnetic pull of the episode is what drives your curiosity in some sense now.
uh yes and no,
Mm.
right? So I mean, sometime back, I mean, I think actually a long while back, I mean, now that I think about it, right? So I stopped. um I've not had a TV in the house for about 10 years now, right? And that was it didn't. I mean, I do have a TV, but cable news basically, right? I haven't had it for like 10 years now,
You
right?
cut the
And
cord a while ago.
exactly, right? I cut that, right? And I think that has been really really useful for me, because it frees up my time to deliberately consume things that I want, right? As opposed to you walk into some households and the TV is just on, right? I mean, it's the case in my parents' house also, right? Where the TV is just on no matter what's running on it, right? It could be the weather, it could be some television soap or some news or whatever it is, it's just on, and you're just like zombie like consuming all of this stuff, right? uh, so to me, I mean, being really deliberate about what you consume is an integral thing to preserving your sanity, right? because 99.99% of the things out there are crap, right? Absolute crap that doesn't impact you one bit, right? So just do this simple exercise in your head, right? What are three really good articles you remember from the last week, or perhaps last month, or last 6 months, or last year? I'll really struggle to remember like two or three really, really good ones. I mean, I won't even remember the headlines actually. And then ask yourself the question, how many of these really made a difference in your life? So I'm in this enviable situation of being a dilettante for everything, right? Where I can learn a little bit about policy, little bit about politics, little bit about religion, little bit about culture, and I take myself very seriously as a dilettante. Okay, I don't want to know, I don't want to, like, there are very, very few things I really want to get in the weeds with, right? SaaS, for example, right? So I first discovered SaaS, software as a service, for people, unbeknownst to the SaaS world, right? So
It's not the sass of your parents' TV soap.
exactly. So I discovered SaaS in 2012, 2013. And since then, I've just wanted to learn everything about it, right? And that is something I don't mind going really deep on, right? Consuming all of the damn things that I have to read, whether it's the Kel blog or the Saster, or Mark Saster's blogs, or whatever else, right? I want to read, I want to learn, I want to consume everything about everything in that, right? Because I feel like it also augments my place in the ecosystem in some sense, right? So that's something that we can develop on later, which is that you are not just yourself, but you are a connection of everything around you, right, in your workplace. So having a fair understanding of the larger picture is super important to how effective you can be at your workplace, at your work itself, right? So so I don't want to learn too much about like certain things, right? So my consumption revolves around like, I mean, going deep on certain things and just barely knowing some other things, right? And that's how I kind of like think about it. And I listen to, so after the podcasts I started listening to a lot of podcasts myself, right? And for me it's kind of a homework and kind of an entertainment. Like, think of it as like an infotainment, right? So I listen to Tim Ferriss, Brown Pundits, How I Built This, Art of Manliness. There are quite a few Indian podcasts also that are like really good. There's this kid who runs, there's a friend called Jivraj, who runs this Indian Silicon Valley podcast where he talks to, some of the best founders and investors around, right? I mean, really, really nice conversations and plenty to learn from, right? So a lot of podcasts. And also the thing I like about podcasts is that, I mean, it's like a parallel activity, right? You don't have to be fixated to a screen. I mean, you can be doing household chores or like cooking or cleaning or whatever it is and have this in your head, right? I mean, so I feel like it gives you the gift of time in that sense. And if you are able to like practice listening at 1.5x, that again adds some time in your life, I mean, you can't do all of that all the time, right? I mean, I was listening to Vitalik Buterin and I really had to tone it down, right? So I had to listen to it like real time, because I mean, he has a very fast cadence. And also, I mean, some of the stuff that he was saying required a lot of cognitive, like it imposed a lot of cognitive load on me, right? I had to really think about what he's talking about. So these are literally, what I consume, right, in terms of infotainment and stuff. In terms of pure entertainment, I mean, even those aspects, right? I'm trying to reduce this scroll behavior, where so we've replaced the television running 24/7 with the social media scrolls, right? Which is that you have 5 minutes, you just like, you do that, and you don't care what's bombarding your head and so on. So that's the other thing, right? Uh, be really ruthless about how you curate your social feed, right? Mute, block, follow only the right things, right? I mean, just like be ruthless about it, because that's occupying mind space, even if you don't want to, right? So that, and I have, basically, like, I have this 5 or 10 minute clip kind of a uh, um, these 5 or 10 minute videos, that I insert instead of the scrolling. So these could be clips from The Office, right? So let's say, I mean, I finish a meeting 5 or 10 minutes before, and instead of scrolling or instead of sending another damn email, I kind of mix it up with these things, right? I mean, I really like this show called Impractical Jokers. So these are 5 or 10 minute kind of clips that are just pure entertainment, takes your mind off, right? I've never been the kind of Netflix person, right? It's just I find it hard to not be doing something and just be consuming. But I'm practicing that to a certain extent just so that I can switch off. That just so that I don't end up all weary and tired even after a weekend. Which kind of happens to me as well, right? So I have this tendency to be wanting to do things, right? So I've realized regional content is very, very good in that sense, right? It opens up a different part of your head, and it's not something. I feel like we're living in an Englishman's world. you know Most of the time it's that paradigm that you're operating in, right? But listening to or watching regional content kind of opens up this other part of your brain, and it's nice. It's very nice, right? I mean, so on the weekends I'm watching Kannada or Malayalam or other types of Tamil movies or whatever. So that is in essence what I consume.
No, I love what I heard, because I mean, one hand, I think just to come back to the India thing, Bharat is definitely cool. I think we need to help make it even more
Yeah,
cooler, and everyone can lend a hand in doing that. But
yeah,
just going back, I love the fact that you've been thoughtful and deliberate about. I mean, we almost call it. I think we discussed it when we were on your show about the curiosity diet as a kind of a thali. You look at it that way,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and you say that there is a place for that sweet, that fun,
yeah,
entertaining kind of thing. You don't have to look down upon it. It is a proportion that you want to get right,
yeah.
and the amount that you consume, and the rate at
So
which you consume.
just to add on that, right? I mean, most people schedule the things that they have to do, right? They schedule the work that they have to do, right? I i mean, again, my wife thinks I'm nuts for doing this, but I actually schedule stuff that is outside of work but is equally important for me, like my workout, for example, right? My workout is scheduled on my calendar, right? And chill time, right? Chill time is scheduled on my calendar, right? Because I can do those things without any regrets, right? Because otherwise, I mean, you always think of like this as in between work, that I have to finish this and get somewhere, right? But you don't have to. I mean, and see all of these things, right? And especially in this post-COVID world that we're living in, right, where your calendar bleeds. I mean, things bleed into each other, and it's very important for you just to maintain your sanity to kind of siphon off blocks of your time for specific things that would otherwise get left behind. you know because otherwise your work just like pretty much like
Mm,
submerges everything, right?
correct.
So really schedule time. I have time on my calendar to talk to my wife,
Mm,
which is again, which is pretty nuts. But 9 o'clock, I know that something goes off. Maybe I won't talk at 9 o'clock,
mm,
right? But maybe I'll talk at 9:30 or something of that sort, right?
yeah,
But
it
these are
gets done.
things
It'll
that
get done. Yeah.
it'll get done, and it'll slip otherwise.
Mm,
And you won't realize on a daily basis nothing will change. But then when you look back a year, right, how many quality conversations have you had, or how
correct.
many workouts have you gotten,
Mm,
right? Or how many movies have you watched, for example, right? If that's something that you like, right? So if it has to get done, it has to be on the calendar, I feel. you know
mm. Yeah, so you spoke about things like reading, remembering the great articles that you might have read recently. I can't help but kind of briefly talk about things like the compounds that we have, the daily reader compound that we have, where the idea is to offer people, reduce that friction, give them that article and say, just read this, take my word for it, we've done the hard work, or go and watch this particular thing. I think curation plays a big role in it. If you can find that trusted source, and they can help you fill in the right gaps, then you're spending your time so much better than just
Absolutely.
mindlessly wandering around. And then there is a place for your fun, absolutely guilt-free consumption or whatever you want to do. So
Yeah.
all that you said is just like music to our ears. Roshan, then I also wanted to ask you, where is there a place for something like a book in your life, in this kind of calendared life of yours? Do you still get through books, and tell me a couple of recent interesting books, because we promised the last time we spoke to talk about books the next time. So let's bring that in as well.
Sure. So I'll be honest. I mean, I've slipped on the books front, right? I mean, so there was like even last year, I would go to bed with a book in my hand, right? Uh, so I'd basically turn off all the screens and whatnot, keep my mobile a fair distance away, and read something and maybe get through about 15 pages or whatever, and then fall asleep. That's the best way to fall asleep, I feel, right? And fall asleep with a book by my bedside. But I've kind of slipped on that front. I'm trying to get back into it, right? And something that I've learned, right? I mean, is to abandon books and is to consciously abandon books. Um, I'll give you an example, right? I mean, my reading behavior slipped because of one book. It's a book called Hyper Focus that I've picked up, right?
Mhm.
It's a great book. It's a fantastic book suggested by a good friend of mine. It's a fantastic book, but I kind of got the idea of what it wanted to say, right? It's one of those books where, I mean, I think the first 100 pages, you know what the gist is,
Right.
right? It's about being deliberate about your time. And it's a book that I would 100% advise to people, or at least to get the, basic bare concepts of the book and whatnot. But the prospect of that, reading that book seemed so dull to me that I just kind of slipped. And I mean, days became weeks and weeks have become a few months now where I haven't really gotten back to that reading habit, right? And I was thinking to myself last week that, man, why don't I make the conscious decision to abandon this book? Just to say to myself that, look, I've gotten everything I want to get through this book. It's okay if I miss the 20% or 30% or even 50% that I could get from this, but let me just abandon it for now and pick up something else, right? Because there's no point like depleting your energy trying to like get through things, right? I mean, I feel like you need to save that in the tank for the stuff that you really have to do that you don't like, right? Maybe, I mean, talking to some distant relative that you perhaps may not know or care about, but you have to, right? Rather than these kind of things which you have an entire where you have a choice to like not do that, right? uh, but otherwise, I mean, I pick up mostly non-fiction stuff, which again is something that I'm trying to change. I do want to pick up fiction and read the Murakamis of the world and whatnot. My wife is a big fan of those kind of books. I definitely want to pick up those books, but otherwise, um, um my favorite authors or the books that I really like have had a significant impact on my life, right? I mean, these are people who literally changed my life, right? And see, we are blessed to have these authors or whatever who condense their life's learnings in like 250 or 300 pages, right? And give it to you like almost free of cost, right? What is like 250, 300, or even $1,000 for a book that will change your life, right? I mean, to me, two or three people stand out. One is Nassim Taleb, who I'm sure all of you are a fan of as well. So I just adored. I mean, I didn't know. I don't know what the right word is to describe it. I mean, it's one thing that's had a profound impact, profound impact in my life, which is Skin in the Game, and then later reading Fooled by Randomness. Right? It's just one of those books, especially Fooled by Randomness, that leaves you gobsmacked of how little you know and how wrong you've been about everything, right? And once you, I mean, it's getting red pilled, right? I mean, it's like you can't go back to a world before that. So Nassim Taleb for sure. And the other person who had a significant impact on me was Jordan Peterson. um, I also believe that these books have a way of jumping out of the shelf at certain points in your life, right? I found Jordan Peterson in 2016, I would say 2016, 2017, when I was going through a very difficult time. My startup wasn't going anywhere. I had to make that hard choice of winding up the startup and looking for employment. I had to get married very soon, right? But I had zero in my bank account and all of that, right? I mean, it was a terrible time, and I picked up this book and I started listening to his lectures. And uh, he's got this Maps of Meaning series as well, Jordan, on YouTube, which is just amazing, right? And it really helped. It really empowered me in the sense that, okay, I mean, I started taking responsibility for things, and I always feel like it's old wine and new bottle, right? I mean, it's always the case. But then, I mean, that new bottle is something that fits in your context today, right? And that is very, 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 very important, because everything that has to be said has already been said before. It has, right? I mean, you look at the last 3 or 4, 10 books, nonfiction that you've read, there's nothing new that someone is saying, but they're saying it in a way that applies to your context today. And which is why it makes it so much important, right? Um, Otherwise, I liked our friend Rory Sutherland's book, Alchemy. Again, a fantastic, fantastic book. For anyone in marketing or advertising, I think Rory is a must listen, right? Again, someone who changes your mind very, very profoundly. Otherwise, there are books that come into my life at certain points, like Scott Adams, for example. He had this book called How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Bigly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which talks about stacking skills, right? Which talks about I think a lot of us have this FOMO of not being as good as someone or whatever, but this guy actually gives you a hack to be great without having to be that Michael Jordan of whatever you're doing, right? Which is to stack skills meaningfully and be the 1%, top 1% of the people at the intersection of all these skills, right? And then, of course, Atomic Habits by James Clear was very simple and effective as well. But yeah, otherwise, I would love to go back to reading fiction. I used to read a fair bit of Woodhouse back in the day. And that gave me a lot of joy. I want to get back to that.
Great. A lot of familiar names, a lot of, I think, I like to say that this is the best time in history to be a learner, right? If you want to learn, there's nothing can stop you. You've got, it's cheap, it's democratized, it's out there. All you need to do is say, you put your hand up and just turn on the tap. I think.
No, but the flip side of it is also to be really, really mindful about the kind of stuff that you pick up on, right? Which is where, I mean, the kind of programs that you guys are running is amazing, right? It's really, really amazing because, again, I come back to Taleb's principle of via negativa, right? So which is that subtract more than you want to add, right? If you don't do dumb stuff in life, you will automatically end up doing the right stuff, right? Or rather, I mean, at least you'll converge on doing the right stuff. Similarly, I think if you don't consume all the really absolutely useless, utter crap kind of things out there, I mean, you will somehow find your way to the good stuff.
Just be less stupid every day, I think, is a simple thing to follow.
I think that's a very noble goal to have.
So, Roshan, we have about 5 minutes left. I want to ask you one question about marketing. We can't do justice to that whole topic today,
Sure.
especially modern B2B marketing and SaaS related topics. But I wanted to ask you, there is a lot of consumerization, right? We are all exposed to a lot of B2C marketing. That is shaping our B2B products, the way we look at them as well. So I wanted to ask you, if you put on your B2B marketer hat, how is this new landscape of media, podcasting, the sort of the consumer experience, me as an individual getting being swayed by content, how is that playing out, do you see, in the B2B world? So you do more people doing podcasts, more internal podcasts for individuals to build a brand. Do you see all that really becoming the next big wave?
Right. See, I think the more things change, the more things remain the same, right? I mean, and oftentimes people get blinded by the shiny things right in front of them, right? Whether it's newer channels or newer methods and campaigns and so on and so forth. But really, I mean, you have to stay true to the core of marketing, right? Which is that ultimately you are solving a problem for somebody, right? Now, this somebody may be taking maybe applying it for themselves, or maybe they're part of an organization where they're trying to solve that with 7 other people, right? And it might impact 1,000 member or 10,000 member organization, whatever, right? people often confuse those nuances, which are like secondary nuances, with the primary job of marketing itself. The primary job of marketing is to move someone to some emotion, some action, right? And I feel like B2B, especially, people are oftentimes like, confused by these kind of things, right? And B2B has a lot to learn from B2C, right? So look at software, the way it's getting commoditized, right? I mean, if there's even a $50 million market for anything, or $100 million market for anything, there are 10 companies in, Koramangala and somewhere else which will do that, right? Software is getting commoditized at a fierce rate, right? So what is it that differentiates, a Drift from some other company that built a website chatbot, right? Those are things that you have to kind of reflect upon, right? I mean, we may smirk and we may, be smug about these guys in the valley who say, go come up with things like, the workspace for remote, or, conversational marketing, or whatever. But there's an absolute point to that, I mean, there's a genuine, sincere point that we're actually missing as Indians, right? Which is the narrative and the storytelling aspect of things, right? Which is to paint a picture for your users for things that you're building that may not be essential for them at this point of time. See, if you ask me 10 or 15 years back, and I was one of the early users of Slack, right? Was Slack integral for us at that point of time? No. But is Slack integral today? 100% yes. Why? Because it will multiply my emails 1,000-fold if I did not have Slack. Right? Now, how did that come to be? You can frown upon Slack as a glorified company chat or whatever it is, right? But I mean, look at the value that they've built, right? And look at the ARR that they're doing at this point of time, right? I might be mistaken, but I think they're probably doing $3 or $4 billion of revenue, right? I mean, which is pretty damn remarkable if you ask me, right? So that is one key difference that, especially for Indian marketers, I have been guilty of it as well, right? Is to not like be blind to, I mean, is to basically like absorb the big picture, and is to have a focus on the narrative and so on and so forth, right? The other thing about B2C is about being the tip of the spear, right? Which again, in B2B, we kind of safely cushion ourselves behind the salespeople, right? And we almost become like servient to the salespeople. "ठीक है, क्या चाहिए आपको? I mean, you want a deck or you want a campaign or whatever, I'll give that to you. And now you go and fight that battle." Why? You don't really have to do that, right? And then there's the other extreme of, operating completely siloed with whatever sales is doing, right? So I feel like there's a healthy overlap between that, right? Somebody told me sometime back that think like a marketer and execute like a salesperson. Especially in the day and age that we're living in today, I mean, I think there has to be a healthy overlap between marketing and sales. As a B2B person, get on the demo, pitch to a prospect, do all of those things. It will give you so much more understanding that, it'll define the way you write copy. Right? These days, half my job goes into catching BS that, my team writes in terms of like emails or copy, or guys, we don't do this. This is not what a prospect wants. Right? Or this particular thing that you said, that's not what they call them. All of this will not be visible to you if you don't really act like a salesperson, and if at the end of the day you don't get in front of a prospect yourself, right? Don't deny yourself the chance and get secondhand information from someone and filter it and do all of those things. So those are two aspects I would say would, especially for B2B marketers. But the larger point also is to stay the hell away from vanity metrics. I think we severely overestimate the quantifiable stuff and underestimate the qualitative stuff. People just figure a way to do dumb things faster. Correct. And essentially at the heart of it, you have to move the needle, right? And find the best proxy for that, right? Forget about your clicks and views and this and that. I mean, figure what is the best proxy for you that you have to aim for. That should be a North Star to move the needle, essentially.
Right. I think it's again back to basics, right? You just keep the fundamentals and keep a strong anchor on those fundamentals, and things will keep changing around. Because I think what I realized, you said that you alluded to a few things that have happened several years ago, but they're kind of playing out today. But because you were interested in SaaS, because you got onto something like Slack, you didn't say, I'm not going to bother about doing it. That's why you are in a position to kind of make or place your bets in a fashion today. So it's always, you kind of look backwards and can do the connection, as the great man said.
Yeah.
So I actually wanted to, just end by therefore asking you, what is it that you're teaching yourself to do that we will hear about in 5 years' time, right? So what is cooking in the background with those? Maybe it's just a 15-minute thing that you're just seeing something. You're saying that, okay, I'm just going to look at it a little bit while I'm running the podcast, doing work. What is that we can probably expect to talk to you about in 5 years' time?
Um, so this is an important thing, right? And the Art of Manliness has a kick-ass blog. I remember reading about what kind of hobbies a person should acquire. I'm not. Let me see. Let me see if I can find it and probably link it to you guys. Yeah, so find a hobby that involves your body, right? I mean, that has a physical element to it. Find a body that find a habit or a hobby that exercises your mind. Find a hobby that you can do with your better half, and so on and so forth. I think they've really thought through that, and that's really important. See, when I look at my life, right, I mean, in terms of what I want to do right now, so one of the defining things over the last 5-6 years has been caring for some of the older people in my life, right? And observing them, and really coming to that understanding of, how do I want to be when I'm at that age, right? When I'm 65, 70, 75, whatever it is, right? And that has impacted me a great deal in terms of like what I consume or what I do, right? It changed my perspective on fitness itself, in some sense, where, I mean, I started, like, Peter Attia is a great person that people should follow. I mean, he has this thing called the Centenarian Olympics or something of that sort. On what is the core body strength you need to be a healthy 100-year-old, or to be a functional 100-year-old, right? Those are things, and I kind of liken all of these new skills and learnings to that also, right? So what will keep you happy, entertained, content at 65, 70 years old, right? And those are things that I think you need to pick up. Um, when I look at some of the happiest 65, 75, or older people, right, around, those are people who can keep themselves entertained either through books or through music or through arts or whatever it is. They don't need anyone in their life, right? At the same time, they do have those 4 or 5 very close relationships that they can talk, and they can have that uninterrupted 1 or 2 hours of like conversation, right? And they're sufficiently interesting. I mean, they've traveled, or they perhaps know a skill that's out of the ordinary or whatever. So last year I tried to learn Japanese, and must say I failed horribly. But it's a fascinating language, right? I mean, I've since paused on that, but I mean, I hope to get back to that. Uh, right now, I'm trying to learn Ethereum, like basically understand. I do feel that I think it will play a very big part in our lives going forward. So I do want to understand the at least the basics of Ethereum, try to understand, how it will impact and so on and so forth. Um, and yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it, I would say. Perhaps learn cooking also around this time. Yeah.
Great, but one thing is sure. I know when we speak to you in whenever the next time, maybe in hopefully earlier than 5 years, you'll be doing something else. That I think I can take a safe bet on. So on that note,
Hopefully.
Roshan, thanks so much for this conversation. I learned a lot of interesting things. I'm going to chase up on some of these posts, books, people that you mentioned, uh, and I look forward to having you soon. So thank you so
Hey,
much.
this was a pleasure. I really liked talking to you, Ramanand, and thanks so much, Harish, as well, for this fantastic idea to get together and talk. And hopefully, we do this more often.
Awesome.